Now for the entirety of this video, I can tell you like the specs, I can give you like the scientific crap, all that different stuff, but honestly I don't think that matters. You just really need to know how would this play out in the field, and so that's what I'm going to try to do my best to explain to you in this video. Alright, so we got two awesome cameras here today. We have the Sony ZV-E1 and then we have the Sony ZV-E10. Now when it comes to price, this guy over here is pretty expensive, over double the price of this camera right here. But when it comes to buying a camera, the most expensive camera isn't always the camera that you necessarily need, especially when it comes to buying your first camera as a content creator, freelancer, or if you're just trying to get started with your nonprofit business and etc. So first let's talk about the obvious, the Sony ZV-E10. This little guy is a crop sensor camera, while the other camera, the Sony ZV-E1, is not. It's a full frame. And now you may be wondering what that means. Why is that important? So let's think about it like this. If you're a person who's shooting at night or in dark situations a lot, whether that's like, I don't know, at a church, or you're filming a lot of night weddings, then the Sony ZV-E10 really isn't the best for that, and here's why. So whenever you're using a full frame sensor, you're just gonna get a cleaner image in your shadows in your dark areas, because that's just the nature of the sensor itself. I'm definitely not saying you're not gonna be able to get good images in low light, but when it comes to shooting with the Sony ZV-E1, it's a night and day difference, because this guy right here has two dual native ISOs, one at 640 and then the highest one is at 12,800. That's really, really high. So that means that whenever you kick your ISO on this camera to 12,800, all your noise is immediately gone. And then from there, you can keep going up and still get less noise in your image. So whenever you're right under 12,800 and you keep going down a little bit, you're gonna be getting noise there. So that is very important to think about and consider. I think that you can definitely get by with this right here. The only thing I would say is make sure that you get something with a very low aperture. So you want to be looking at lenses like this, the 30mm 1.4, or some of the Sony Tamron lenses. Even a 2.8 will do really, really well. That's definitely going to help you to get a cleaner image in those low light scenarios. So if you buy one of those lenses, it's probably going to be around $600, which puts this camera now being at about $1,200. So again, just something to consider whenever you're looking at a camera. Definitely look at the lens that you need for the scenario you're going to be shooting in. Okay, so moving on to the second thing. So whenever I switch this camera over to 4K 30 and I plug an HDMI cable into it, it seems that for some reason the face tracking, the eye tracking goes away. I'm not sure why this would be an issue at all, but I've tested it over and over again and I'm still getting those issues. Now whenever you're using the HDMI cable on the Sony ZV-E1, you're not going to have any issues at all. Matter of fact, you're going to get some really nice additions to that HDMI. So definitely keep that in mind if you're someone who's going to be using the HDMI port for something like a webcam or a capture card, which brings me to my third thing. That's the USB-C port on both of these cameras. So let's say for instance, you're at an event and you want to live stream your experience that you're having, whether you're doing a booth at a wedding as a vendor, or you're at church and you want to live stream the service, or you're at a concert and you wanted to live stream directly to Facebook or YouTube. Well, with this camera, you can do that at 4K, which is very, very nice through the USB-C port on here. However, when it comes to using the Sony ZV-E10, you're not going to get that high quality option, which isn't that big of a deal, but if you want a high quality stream, then you definitely want to go with something like the Sony ZV-E1, because you're going to get it at 4K. Now when it comes to using the built-in microphones on these cameras, as you can see on the top, it looks very similar to each other. So this is a quick audio test. Right now I'm on the Sony ZV-E10 using only the built-in microphone, and if I go around to the back of the microphone, now you can hear what it sounds like. I am quite a bit close right now, but if I come back around, hey, what up? You can hear how it sounds. So now let's throw on the Sony ZV-E1. All right, now we're on the Sony ZV-E1, and how's the audio sound? Does it sound very different? Let me walk around to the back of the mic, and now I'm coming back around to the front, and how does everything sound? Okay, so now let's talk about frame rates. This camera, as of today, can actually do 4K at 120 frames per second. So if you're someone who knows that you want to capture slow motion, then definitely this is the camera to go with. Now, as far as the Sony ZV-E10 goes, you don't get 120 frames until you go to HD, but in 4K, sorry, the camera just turned off. In 4K, you get up to 30 frames per second. So again, just weigh it out. But if you guys aren't convinced, here's a test between the two so that you can decide if it's worth it for you. Okay, so now let's talk about a few kind of low-hanging fruit when it comes to the differences between these two. So if you have a Sony camera already, then you probably have these bigger batteries, which is nice because you know that you can interchange any of your Sony batteries with these bigger ones. And also that just means that you have a longer battery life than shooting with the Sony ZV-E10 because you just have bigger batteries. Now here's the truth, neither one of these cameras are really made for like productions. They're really not made for that. These are made for content creators. That is the reason why Sony made these cameras. Now, can you use them for like paid gigs as a freelancer or for productions? You definitely can. However, if you're going to be using this guy, the Sony ZV-E1 as your production camera, definitely consider the overheating issues that comes with this camera because it definitely overheats. Okay, so we're recording here in the studio right now, knocking out a bunch of short form videos, and I was recording for an hour and 11 minutes, probably 13 minutes on that camera, and we finally have gotten it to overheat for the very first time. That was not my intentions, but I've shot quite a few times now, and I recorded this time, like I said, for an hour and 13 minutes, and the camera it shut off. So let me explain what happened. So I was sitting right here filming, and then I decided I'm gonna stop filming now after an hour and 11 minutes of recording. I went over to the camera, there were no issues. It didn't stop or anything, but when I got over there and I pressed stop on the recording, I did see the yellow overheating symbol. It probably was there before I even walked over there. And then shortly after, the camera showed me an overheating, like it all blacked out, and it had a message on the screen. It said overheating or overheated, or I don't know, something like that. So now, as you guys can see as well, I'm not seeing any overheating symbols on the screen at all. The camera was only off for about maybe 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, and this is what we're seeing. No overheating. Looks like we're ready to go and start recording again. But yeah. Now, as far as this camera goes, it has never shut off on me. But another thing to consider is that if you're going to be sitting it on just kind of a tripod and letting it focus, this camera is not going to be nearly as good as the Sony ZV-E1. So if you want something that's definitely going to nail focus every single time, no shadow of a doubt, and have all the autofocus features that you could dream of, then you want to go with this camera right here because it has all the new autofocus bells and whistles. So here's what I'll say. If you just want to get by with the camera and you want to get your first camera and you're probably gonna end up buying another camera in the next 2 years anyways, I think that this camera is more than fine for you. Again, just make sure you get a pretty good low f-stop lens. I mean, that's my opinion, because you can always just crank up the f-stop later to get whatever image you need if you need everything in focus. But if you're someone who is like, all right, I don't want to buy another camera for the next 2 years. I want to spend some money and know that this is going to be a good camera for a very long time, the Sony ZV-E1 is definitely your option. I know it's quite a bit expensive, but I can promise you it's worth all of that money. Now, hear me out. If you're someone who says, all right, but none of these cameras are good at photos, I need a good photo and video camera, and 120 frames really isn't that important to me, well then this is your camera right here, the Sony a7 IV. This is the best hybrid camera. This one is at $2,600, and this guy is a workhorse. It's so reliable. It gets you 33 megapixel photos. It gets you 4K at 60 frames per second. I mean, it's just a great camera. The autofocus is extremely reliable. So if you are someone who's deciding between these two, just take into consideration some of the things that I've said. Now, if you're someone who knows that you're going to be shooting an analog image and you want to color grade it to get a beautiful looking image out of these cameras, then make sure you check out this playlist over here that has all of my color grading tutorials.